given the information, the death penalty would not now have been abolished in the state of Illinois, although it's proven that it was inherently wrong and it was depicted lopsidedly, and certain people were killed, were targeted. Now, that was a 10-year battle for me. I came in as a freshman legislator, and I advocated for the abolition of the death penalty because of the inherent wrongs involved in it. It took the Tribune newspaper and a series of other means to get the information out to the people so that they could see the inherent wrongs in that particular piece of legislation. So now, after 20 years, they have abolished the death penalty, and they did that last year. This is the same kind of issue. This is the same kind of issue. The reality of an individual being able to protect his home is something that inherently, that's a God-given right. Men and women, you work all your life to build a home. You should be allowed to protect it. Once you are given the necessary information, the information that you'll get hopefully tonight, and I have some other packets of information for those individuals about what they're doing in other states. I'll give those to the people that are interested. But once you're given all of the information, and you can see that in some states crime has decreased as a result of a concealed carry law. In a lot of states, all over the United States, there's different versions of concealed carry. As Representative Jordan spoke to, we don't have a final bill. Right now, we're there, you know, and that's what we do in Springfield. And by the way, I serve as a lobbyist for the State Rifle Association. We have a bill drafted, and bills begin in a very generic form, and they become negotiated. At the end of the day, the input from the community, from individuals like yourself, will determine what that final bill would look like. We don't want guns in the churches. Then you're gonna have to talk to the preachers. You don't want guns. You don't want the guns in the school. So your representative is here to listen to what's your comfort level.
And by the way, all the states, 2 states are just like Illinois, Massachusetts and New Jersey. They don't permit citizens to carry. They don't issue permits to citizens. They issue permits to security guards, police officers, retired police officers, some business owners. But they're like Illinois. They're a non-issue state, those 2. So there are 3 non-issue states. It's not all, the other 49 don't issue permits. So just to clarify that, those 2 states are just like Illinois. But you mentioned, we got some questions, but I hope sooner or later we could ask, you say that you hope it's going to be a deterrent, but has it been? There are 47 states that do issue permits. And I want to know in those 40, and no one's ever answered this question, I want to know in those 47 states, has it really been a deterrent? I got in my hand 2 articles, one from 1998, a book called More Guns, Less Crime, by a guy named John Lott, who argues that concealed carry has reduced crime. But then an article in 2003 by Yale Law Professor John J. Donahue III and a fellow by the name of Ayers says that's not true. The data says it has not had an impact on reducing crime. So it's not as definite as you say it is. Let me get to these questions.
Okay, you kind of asked the question, but I know you alluded to the fact that we are going to get some information about the states that have the concealed carry. Could you just kind of give me an example of a state that has some limitations and, yes, and what that looks like?
Minnesota. You cannot carry them in bars. You cannot carry them in the schools. You can't carry them in church. In fact, but it requires, the law up there requires the businesses to post saying, you cannot bring a gun into my restaurant. Any business can refuse to allow anybody with a gun to come in by posting. And that's in the law. You have, I don't know if our laws, you guys are considering that or not.
Right now
there's nothing,
right now there's
talked about that yet.
It's all being negotiated.
So I
And it's not my bill, so I'm not
can talk to you and say, this looks good, and I call you and say, that.
Absolutely,
Oh.
absolutely, absolutely.
My question was, when it does come forward, when it moves up after the other issues are out, when it comes to that form down to the time where it's going to be voted, will these limitations, restrictions, or whatever come with that at that time? Will they have been decided upon, or will this pass and then it's decided upon? And I have to say that my mom was a policewoman, and so we had guns in the house and everything. And I totally understand the whole having that right and having that choice. I get that, and I think that's good. But I also have seen, and I think it's because it's so fresh in my mind, that when we were out going door to door, we just saw a total of, I think it was 8, including the paddy wagon, that stopped a car because they were driving without, the license wasn't quite right. And then, you know, that leads me back to another issue because, you know, things are happening. We might have to get rid of some policemen. The safety is up in a roar too. But then again, do we need 8 of them going for that kind of thing? And that was just kind of overwhelming to see that and block off a street with one car kind of thing. Where if it's some young men, I have a young son, if there's still some things that, you know, we have trigger happy policemen, we have trigger happy people, we have emotions and whatever. Along with restrictions on where to carry the gun, when it comes to registering and getting your whatever card you need and all that stuff, that I think is going to be very, very important in getting that to people, knowing who shouldn't be allowed to have it too. I mean, there's got to, you have that right, but there are some people who really shouldn't have that right. And so I think I want to know, it's important that these things are in line, and I think those things should be up front.
In terms of passing a final bill, anytime a bill is passed, by and large that bill is in the format that it'll be before the governor signs it, which actually turns it into law. But I do agree there has to be limitations, and part of that is the process that's been undertaken right now, which is part of the reason why we're having the conversation, because we do want to have input as to what the community feels is palatable. Many of my Chicago colleagues are doing the very same things in their communities, because historically Chicago has always been anti-guns, period. But a number of the Chicago representatives that have typically always been adamantly against concealing carry are now coming to they're now bagging into a different position, because like you said, with some of the public safety issues that we're grappling with you know, some of the state and local budgets that are, you know, very much so constrained. And so one of my colleagues, she's actually chair of the House Black Caucus, when she's not in the legislature, she actually works for the city of Chicago, for the police department. And a gentleman tried to come into her home, and she called the police, and the response time was 24 minutes. And and she voted no for concealing carry, but she's doing some of this very same information, trying to gather what would people feel most comfortable with. Because, you know, one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to pass something that then later on down the road we find ourselves in a situation where we're saying, oh goodness, that was too much, which I think is probably happening with a lot of the legislators in Florida that voted for standing ground. Standing ground is absolutely a problem, and that's why you're seeing some legislators talking about repealing that.
Has this country actually given up on the fact that we as citizens, through our legislatures in the states and in the federal government, given up on the fact that they cannot control, there's no legislation that can control selling guns, which they do out in the open at these gun sales, boot sales as they call them, trunk sales, that there's no way to control illegal guns in this country, which is what really frightens all of us, right? Okay, so the point being, if the answer to that is yes, we have given up on that, well, what's the solution? Let's all have a gun. Let's all have a gun. I don't know that that's a solution.
Kennesaw, Georgia. Many of you probably heard of that town. I taught there for several years. Several officials attribute a dropping crime in the city over the past 2 decades to a law that requires residents to have a gun in their house. In 1982, the City Council passed unanimously a law requiring heads of households to own at least one firearm with ammunition. So Kennesaw, Georgia, I've taught school there.
You mean that a law-abiding citizen would be one who refused to have a gun?
Say it again?
And then you say an unlawful citizen would be one who refused to have a gun under that law.
That is correct.
That's
That is
crazy.
correct.
That's
However,
craziness as far as I'm concerned.
and I understand that.
No, it isn't.
No, I understand that. I totally understand that. But we all know that there are many, many laws that are on the books that are not enforced.
But I don't think that's a good example of what we're talking about.
Concealed carry for me, if we have it, whatever state we're in, and I'm walking down the street and I see somebody who's got a gun walking, and I see that on a regular basis. And at any point in time, I feel uncomfortable because of that. What it's going to mean is that I'm probably going to think, I need to get a gun because I may have to protect myself. And what this means to me, down the road, 5 years, 10 years, this is just pushing us as a people to not trust each other.
Right.
To not believe we can trust the person sitting across that bus. That's how, and I'm sorry, that's how I feel. You can shake your head, but that's how I feel.
You can't trust anybody today, whether they got a gun or not.
But my question has to do with, I've heard a lot of people talk about how historically the gun control laws have been racist and, and often designed to keep blacks from owning guns, okay? But when I look at today, I wonder, as we move towards broader gun rights laws, if we aren't seeing racism in a different way, because so many people who are now law-abiding citizens also may have felonies in their records, and so they still can't get a gun. It kind of equates with, in a lot of places, not having the right to vote. And I've never heard anybody talk about that point as it applies to black people.
One of the things that definitely concerns me as a father of 2 African-American young males is teaching them the law. I do teen law conferences and teen law awareness. I think that the law is a very tricky thing that sets the trap for so many people in so many different ways. And I'm a big advocate of people knowing all of their rights and teaching it to our kids. Getting a felony on your record is a serious mark against you, and it's going to put extreme limitations in a whole broad arena of areas. So to say individuals that have felonies don't have gun rights, there's a lot of other rights that they don't have, and I think we have to do a more effective job ourselves as parents and citizens of helping our children keep their records clean.
This big push for these concealed carry is really pushed by the NRA. They're the group that's financing and put the legislators under threat of no campaign money and all that stuff to get these votes changed. They're the ones behind it. This is the only country that is so much in love. I travel outside this country, and they all wonder, why are you so in love with guns here? I own guns in the home, and I have nothing against having the guns in the home. But for a person walking down the street with a gun in his pocket, no.
Mr. Petty, I've never taken a dime from the NRA.
So many of them do.
I've never, but that's not, but I can only speak for me.
Yeah.
I have never taken a dime from the NRA. I've never taken a dime from the State Rifle Association. That has absolutely nothing to do with the vote that I would take on this issue or any other issue. May they be legislators that are moved by that? Could be. That's not me though. For me, my position on this issue, as I stated before, and it's as genuine now and as sincere now as it was 20 minutes ago. I really studied the issue. I opened myself up to talk to community members, and I got people from all over this community, black, white, brown, blue, who said this is something that we need. We need this in our community. I went after data. I found enough data that to me it became a wash. You know, and as I said in the opening, there was data saying that you have people out there touting that crime automatically goes down. I didn't necessarily believe that. You have folks that say it turns communities or states into the Wild Wild West. That was unfounded. So I made this decision based on what I felt like the citizens of this community wanted from their state legislator.
Lobbying does not necessarily mean that you give money to people. First of all, you need to know that. Well, you know, the State Rifle Association has not given any money to Representative Gordon.
Well, she just told us that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We do not support clients or representatives based on, you know, their
voting record.
Their voting record. I mean, just don't do that.
I would like to respond to the gentleman's question or his accusations in a very calmly manner, if I can possibly do that. But now, I worked at the university 32 years, University of Chicago. I provided for my family and myself when these days come around. Now, I took on the city of Chicago, the gangbangers on one side and the city government on the other side. Believe me, it was not easy. They were coming after me on one side, the city government was, and the gangbangers were coming after me on the other side, me and my family. Now, since then until now, I have not been paid one dime.
Amen. And that is why I'm here. And that is why I will be here. NRA have not given him a nickel. Second Amendment Foundation, not a nickel. And our law is right here to say it.
And I want to, there's more to it. NRA was not even with us. Me, the Second Amendment Foundation, NRA was not even in the picture when we first started this venture.
That is correct. And they filed took a very savvy legal maneuvering to be even named in the lawsuit when McDonald got to the Supreme Court.
Right.
Because of their legal. I think we need to separate these issues.
Sure.
I don't think there's anybody in this room that is opposed to what you fought for in the United States Supreme Court. We had the right to do it, but you and what they did was just extend the D.C. case to the rest of the country, the other 50 states. Nobody's opposed to that. Right. We're at the second stop, the concealed carry stop, and that's where the people that supported your lawsuit want to take this argument. That's the next level they want to take it to. Right. That's the question before this group here tonight. Do you or do you not support concealed carry? And so I think we're all 100% in agreement with what you did, and we commend you for it. And it had to happen. We know that. Chicago made a mistake. We didn't make that mistake in Peoria. We didn't make it in East Peoria. They made a mistake, and that law needed to be changed. And everybody knew that it was going to be changed sooner or later. When they made the decision about D.C., we knew it was going to be changed. They should have just said, this not only applies to D.C., it applies to the rest of the country as well. And then your lawsuit would have been null and void at that point, moved at that point. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to make a comment regarding, earlier we were talking about how guns can be a deterrent, and then there was some argument on both sides. I know in Switzerland they have, and I don't agree with the law in the town that had where you have to, every household has to own a gun, but that's what they do in Switzerland, and they have one of the lowest gun crime rates in the world. And then in Australia, they actually banned guns, which I know we're not talking about gun banning, but I'm talking about the deterrent factor. They actually banned guns in 1996, and their gun gun homicide rate actually went up by 300%, and that's no lie. So that, and that was over a 10-year period, but you know, there is a deterrent factor there. It just may take time to see it. It took 10 years to see it, you know, in Australia. So I think there is a deterrent factor.
Now,
I want to just read a slice of history here, if you don't mind. The Colfax Massacre of 1873. During that time, after Reconstruction, blacks were gaining progress. We were gaining momentum, okay? The White League, a paramilitary group intent on securing white rule in Louisiana, clashed with the Louisiana's almost all-black state militia. Want to know what happened? There were 3 whites that died, and over 100 blacks were murdered after they had surrendered and was unarmed. This particular case is the case that was still good law when Cruikshank and when Heller and McDonald was being heard. Slave codes, black codes, all types of restrictions were placed on blacks to not have guns after the 14th Amendment because the slave owners didn't want them to uprise and to overturn the law. So the whole design from what I've seen here is that the intent of the law was for a person to be able to protect themselves according to the Constitution. And Frederick Douglass says you'll know you're a citizen when you have the right to carry your own musket. So I think the law is really in our favor. I think the law speaks to self-defense.
Jehan wants to get the feel of the community as to whether or not we are in favor of concealed carry or not. And I haven't asked for it yet. And so I think just this is an unscientific vote as far as I'm concerned. It obviously is not, won't be binding on her in terms of what decision she ought to make. She's got to make it as a legislator, and she has to take all factors into consideration, not just what she hears here tonight. But I'd just like to see from my own edification, how many people in this room are really in favor of concealed carry?
Real quick.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10 and 11. Right.
The one thing I'd like to say is...
Wait a minute, let me finish my straw poll. All against, let me see your hands. How many we got? 1, 2, 3, 4,
At this point, I am, but I need more
5, 6,
information.
Yeah, I mean, is it going to be undecided? What about undecided?
What about the undecided?
So really,
Undecided.
I'll give you an undecided.
Undecided.
13 with their hands up against it. Undecideds.
I'm undecided.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Let them up first.
Done. So I'm going to take a vote to make sure that how many people in the room are for having a gun in your home, because I think...
Oh, I don't
That I need to see the entire bill along with what the limitations are, the restrictions. Will they be able to carry this concealed gun to the mall? In addition, I mean, those are things that, you know, we talk about the school, the church, but what about and the town, what about their other public places? So without looking at the entire bill, with all the limitations, I think that any of us that have a concern about public safety needs to, before making a conscientious decision, a yay or a nay, you need to look at the entire big picture.
Absolutely.
Just to respond to that, I know that in Minnesota, it requires that business owners affirmatively post that you cannot bring a gun into the establishment.
Yes.
But if you don't do that, with the exception of schools and hospitals and those community services like that, if you don't do that, then people can walk into your business with a gun. So most establishments up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis at least, post in there that don't come in here with a gun. Some states don't have that. It's different throughout all the states as to whether or not that's a requirement.
To me, it has been a very hurting thing to think about and see the kids of mothers that has been wasted away with guns. I don't, you know, there's a lot of talk about guns of us, mostly the law-abiding citizens. But are you thinking about, are you looking at who's got the guns today? And I don't advocate anybody going out there buying a gun when this bill is passed, if it passes, or any kind of other kind of bill, unless you've gotten the necessary training, the necessary credentials, feel comfortable using a weapon. Because if you don't, you're asking for trouble.
We need to also have something in, I don't know if you want to call it training or whatever, for those who will be selling the guns. And make sure that that is intact and regulated, and you know, and it's and when she said that, of not only the money for that, but then all of these things have to be monitored. So that is money, that's positions, that's whatever. So there is a lot to consider.
Civil rights activists, even those committed to nonviolence resistance, had long appreciated the value of guns for self-protection. Our beloved Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. applied for a permit to carry a concealed firearm in 1956 after his house was bombed. His application was denied, but from then on, armed supporters guarded his home. The Secret History of Gun Laws by Adam Winkler.
Civil rights issue, the issue of abortion, you know, are all kind of moral issues. Death penalty was a moral issue. The war in Vietnam was a moral issue. Martin Luther King had the tenacity, the courage to stand up against the Vietnam War. And when he did, he asked 3 questions. He says, courage asked the question, is it safe? Vanity asked the question, is the issue popular? Politics asked the question, is it expedient? But conscience asked the question, is it right? That's what you need to leave here with, whether it's right